I'm Don Watson, and I'm going to be interviewing Judith Brett. Interviewing is a funny way of putting it. I'm going to ask her 2 or 3 questions, let her talk at any length she likes, and then I'm going to let you ask questions. Are there any farmers here, by the way? Anyone from more than 50 miles from the GPO? 3, right. We're safe. That's good. I'm tempted to ask you what you're here for then. I'll come to that later on. Judy, to begin this, I have one question. I can't believe that we could be so far apart on this matter, but you say you describe Doug Anthony as good-looking.
Well, when you see the photo of them all lined up, he does stand out as actually quite good-looking.
I always thought he had a cruel mouth, like he'd marked too many lambs or something. Anyway, it's funny that. It's just a matter of taste, I suppose. But maybe, yes, I suppose when you think of the cabinet he was in.
Yeah, and the Country Party lineup in 75, he's the only one with any hair.
Oh, it was the hair matter, right. Okay, well, I mean, only...
and you don't boast.
Only some of us will be old enough to remember those old Country Party people, and it's interesting to read in here that there were so many of them in the cabinet, in Fraser's cabinet. They were a huge presence, and now they're sadly diminished. Whether it's sad or not is another question. Here is a bigger question than the one relating to Doug Anthony. I think it's bigger anyway. Let me say this at the beginning. I rather like you, I have a kind of twisted romance with the country. You used to visit it. We're about the same age. You used to visit it as a child. I lived in it, if you can call it that. And no, that's too hard. But on the 7 or 8 miles of the road on which we lived, there were about 24 farmers, each of whom raised about 4 children, all heavily subsidised. And this is largely pre-common market, so, we had empire preference and that sort of stuff for our milk and so on. But about 40 cows with heavy rural subsidies was enough to raise 4 children and send them to the local high school. Most of them left before they got to Form 4, but it was there for them if they wanted it. Now there are 2 farmers on that whole strip. A lot of the land's gone back to rubbish, and you wonder why we cleared it in the first place. It would have been better to leave it as native bush. Some of it's been turned over into monocultural blue gums now. Beautiful original selections of 640 acres, nothing happening there. And then there are 2 other farms still being farmed. I think maybe there are 3. It's an extraordinary change. But I'm not sure, when I think about it, I think, well, there were that land, this magnificent South Gippsland blue gum forest was cleared for 2.5 generations, roughly speaking. And now a lot of it will go back, not to original blue gum forest, it'll go back to blackberries. And the people are building 50 square houses with giant sheds, to just live there and do nothing, grow a pumpkin maybe or something. So that's one point. And then I think if you go up to Lake Mungo, you'll see where people we know lived there for more than 30,000 years. And then another mob came and stayed for 2 generations, and now it's full of rabbits, and that's it. And the history is all about the 2 generations. So what I'm sort of getting at is that I don't know quite what I'm getting at, but I just want to make setting. You make a very strong case for the country, and it's good you call it the country instead of the bush, because we never called it the bush. But some people might say that historically speaking, the country has had its fair share. And in the course of getting their fair share, they've destroyed the mighty bush. They've destroyed vast swathes of the environment. Through the Country Party, through their tribalism, they've debilitated political debate. They've slowed social progress. They've dimmed the national mind, and they've given us a national stereotype of a sort of maudlin desperado in a big hat. And still they want more, they haven't had their fair share. So would you tell us why they deserve their fair share?
Well, I don't know that that's what I was trying to do with the essay. I mean, what I was really trying to do is to give a framework so that people could understand why people in the bush think they deserve their fair share. It's sort of a meta.
But don't they just have to listen to one of the many programs where the bush is always telling us why they deserve a fair share?
Yeah, what I felt when I was watching the independence after the 2010 election and reading the city commentary was I had this sense, I mean, yes, we're of an age where we sort of remember the country. And, I mean, I remember listening to the Country Hour and I had some sense of it. But for a lot of younger people, and this is also would be from teaching students at Latrobe where I teach, I had a sense that they had no sense at all really about why the farmers were even there. I mean, okay, these places have supported 2.5 generations, but there are still people there and there's a historic process that was the reason that they're there. And it was really to just try to recover that history for the sort of contemporary memory rather than to polemically take sides, because I also think a lot of the younger people in the country don't have much sense of the reasons that they're there and that governments put them there. I mean, that's part of the reason why I think there's some sort of continuing political responsibility to try to think about what we're going to do about all this.
But you do conclude that we do need the country and we do need to keep feeding them. My argument is, my question is, do we? Or shouldn't they be left to, make do like the rest of us?
Well, there's two things there. I mean, there's people and there's land. Now, in a way, I mean, we live in a nation is an imagined community, and any nation or the political community live in, there's all sorts of differences of opinion and conflicts of interest and sort of historically inherited problems, which in a way the framework of the nation helps us put a bit of I suppose a circle around and say, well, let's try and solve some of these problems for our bit of land. I mean, because what's the option to say, well, okay, we're just going to live on the coastal rim, looking at the beach, look at the South Pole and whichever bit of the coast we're on, and just leave it all? Like, that's not an option, it seems to me. So your sort of romantic grumpiness, or grumpy romanticism. I mean, it's a sort of romanticism, it seems to me, to think that you can just turn your back on it all.
But I'm not saying we should turn our back on it. I'm asking you to tell me why we should not turn our back on it. I'm not recommending we turn our back on it.
Okay.
I just want you to tell me why we should.
Because there's people.
Because it is called fair share.
Yes. Well, fair share was to try to. I mean, I use that because that's. Well, firstly, if you write a quarterly essay, you have to have a 2-word title. This is something that anybody wanting to write a quarterly essay should know. And I was thinking of regional mindedness, and then one of my friends said people will think it's about Indonesia. So anyway, and fair share is the term that the country keeps using about itself. So that's not me saying they need a fair share, but that's saying that that's what they want. But it's to say, well, there's a whole lot of people who live outside of the capital cities, and they are our fellow citizens, and you can't, one of the things about the Australian Federation as against the Canadian Federation, for example, is we don't have states that are really rich and really poor in the same way. And I don't think a lot of people actually understand why we don't, and understand the fact that there are ideas of a fair share that have been built into our notion of, into the way our federation is structured through horizontal fiscal equalisation, this sort of really mouthful of a term, but which is really about the Commonwealth government taking the tax and sort of spreading it evenly across the land to some extent. And so it was and a lot of the political mechanisms that have been used to bind the country and city together have been actually at the level of state governments. And I think that our sort of national historians haven't done a very good job on that. Now, I know I'm not answering your question. So there's a whole lot of people who live there, and they're our fellow citizens, and there's mechanisms whereby when the Australian Federation was formed, there were mechanisms to ensure that there was some sort of equality of the provision of really basic services like health, education, and communications. But also we've got all this land. Like, what are we going to do with it? I mean, do we just leave it going back to blackberries?
Well,
you know,
no, but I think isn't it reasonable to ask, historically speaking, isn't it reasonable to ask, well, you know, exactly that. What are we going to do with it? I mean, what we do with some of it will be different to what we do with others.
That's true. Yeah.
I mean, and I think it's reasonable, I think, for people who live in the cities or the rough environs to ask, well, how much money should we go on spending on rural Australia when so much has been, as it were, wasted and been very destructively spent? How do you measure whether it's wasted or not? Do you count irrigation schemes as a failure or as a success? They also raised generations of children and caused enormous salination and environmental destruction. I mean, they seem to me like fair questions to ask. Yeah. And the Murray-Darling Basin is surely a very good example where really what's happened there, it seems to me, is a kind of is appalling. And in a way, the argument, their voices for a fair share have seen double standards in the media. As Bernard Keane pointed out a couple of days ago, the enormous media uproar over the building the education revolution thing, where it was shown that 6% of money was wasted in New South Wales, is nothing to what the MDB, the recent Parliamentary Committee report, will waste if they take the farmers and community view that all the money must go towards infrastructure and not to selling water. Now, the consequences of the environment will be very considerable, but it's billions more to put the infrastructure in. Yeah,
but I mean, I suppose one of the things I was trying to do with this essay is to say, I mean, it seemed to me that what happened in the 80s and 90s was that when the country and city had once been, in a sense, joined together as part of some sort of shared nation-building project. Now, it was always, you know, flawed, and obviously, you know, the whole environmental destructiveness of European farming practices and everything has happened. But what happened in the 80s and 90s was the economic liberalism effectively sort of divided the society or the nation into sort of economic units, it seemed to me, in some ways. And to some extent, it seemed to me the city forgot about the country. Now, the country is still there and still, you know, wanting its fair share, but that's, in a way, this is partly to say, well, this is actually also a problem for the city to think about, to not just say, well, you know, the farmers are always whinging and they're always, you know, asking for more, but for the city, I mean, in a way, through environmental politics, there are a lot of city people who do engage with issues to do with the non-metropolitan part of Australia, and so it was to put that into some sort of framework and to say to put an argument to the sort of students of mine who'll say, well, if people want to live out there, it's a lifestyle choice, you know, and it is for some people, but for other people, it's not. It's the basis of a series of historic decisions that were made by governments in the 19th century and the 20th century, and they're there because of that. And for people to, in a sense, understand that and to have some sense of shared responsibility, I guess.
Governments have, you know, including the so-called neoliberal Labor governments have, you know, did. I mean, there were rural adjustment schemes. There were also the development of REDOs, I think they were called, Regional Economic Development Organisations. We divided bits of the country up into those to try and give them a start. And we poured money into...
And the thing is, it isn't. I mean, it isn't all a basket case. I mean, okay, there's a whole lot of environmental degradation, but there are now regional cities that are doing quite well,
thriving.
You know, and thriving. And that the thing that in Victoria that Kennett did, which was to really concentrate the delivery of government services in some of the bigger regional centres, has actually improved the quality of service delivery in the country, even though it's really hard on people if they haven't got public transport, and even though it means that smaller centres have died. So, you know, that it is. But so I think it's to get people to not to see that there are, if you like, I mean, I guess this is what Tony Windsor's wanting to do with national broadband, to say that can bring communications services into the regional towns, so that they can, you know, sell architect services or legal services or whatever to the world. I mean, and it seems to me these are possibilities. It's not just about depressed dairy farmers.
there aren't many of those, in
I know.
South Gippsland, they're not depressed at all. They're doing very well, thank you.
Well, my relatives up in the Golden Valley are pretty depressed.
They do it hard up there. But these seem to be reasonable questions to ask. I mean, there's no question that there are farmers doing extremely well if they've got sufficient capital, sufficient skill.
Yeah.
There are farmers who are utterly crippled by debt, can't sell, can't move really, and as a result, they can't farm well. In the region around West Wyalong, for instance, I've found that 60% of farmers are absentee-owned. 60% of farmers are absentee-owned, and about the same proportion of farmers have debt to the extent that they can't get out. They're stuck. Whereas further up around Walgett, until the recent floods at least, which cut their profits by half, but I met a farmer there who was going to harvest $14 million worth of crop that year alone. He was Farmer of the Year.
But farmers are like 4% of the workforce. I mean, they're not. They're not the only people who live outside of the.
Sure, but I'm just trying. But it's on that. Well, that's another point. My point is, don't we have to make decisions about which farmers should stay on the land and which should not?
Well, the market will in it.
Well, the market's been operating for a long while, and there are still a lot of farmers on there who can't get off, or don't want to get off. There's no
There's declining numbers of.
Yeah, of course there is. But what I'm saying is, if we're going to pour money into the farm and give them what is.
See, this is not just about farming. This is about
communities, if you like.
Yeah, it's about getting, I think, regional communities. Towns like Ballarat and Bendigo and Warrnambool, seeing them as sort of part of the sort of nation as a whole, rather than people living in Melbourne and living in Sydney just imagining that sort of encompasses basically the nation, and then there's Ayers Rock or Uluru.
But I would have thought, Judy, that is about as romantic as it comes, if you don't mind me saying so, that we're going to live in this sort of capsule of Australia where everyone feels part of the place. Right?
Yeah, no, I know, but it's part of, look, this is fairly modest, my ambitions in this essay. I think it's not to actually write a manifesto for the National Party. It's really just to write...
Spare
It's really to just write a historical essay to try to help people understand what the historic relationship between the country and city has been, how it's changed over the last 100 years, and from that to be able to think a bit more sympathetically and maybe a bit more imaginatively about where we might go. It's really quite modest, what I was trying to do.
Well, I'm just trying to see what we might think.
Yeah, so, and I know in the end, at the end of it, I thought I have to, I'd done all my historical bit and looking at, why the city once really depended on the country and how that's changed, and what the sort of pulling apart of country and city has been by processes of economic, cultural, demographic change, and then the way neoliberalism sort of really accelerated that process. And I thought, well, I'm actually going to have to come up with a bit more. I've got to come up with something to sort of look at how to take us to the future. And I have to say I found that very hard. It's really hard, these questions. But it does seem to me that there's we can't just we can't just say, well, it's their problem. I think that's really all I think.
I doubt whether anyone here would be inclined to say that it's their problem, though.
Well,
I think everyone sort of...
Well, maybe, yeah.
Maybe young...
But, even I've got a quote from Tim Fisher. Even he said it's your problem at some point. He said, this is at the end of the century, end of the 90s. He said, well, I'm just sick of everybody whinging. You've just got to come up and reinvent yourself. You can be Veranda Town, or the town with the biggest clock tower, or there's a sort of defeatism in that. And it's appalling for the country party.
Isn't there also a sort of defeatism in saying, well, we will present you with the solution for your community? Isn't that the really defeatist?
Well, I don't. Yes, well, no, but I think it's more for to say I mean, I'm not trying to present solutions. It's more just to say there are certain legitimacy about these about some of these interests, and that. Like, where do you think I'm saying that? I mean, what? Like,
oh, well, the opposite of what Tim's saying. I mean, if Tim's saying, well, you know, you've got to come up with your own solutions. You're saying that's defeatist. I'd say, well, you could equally argue, well, it's defeatist to say we can't.
I suppose what's defeatist about it was that they were sort of gimmicky. I mean, it's like, you know, this proliferation of festivals now across rural Australia. There's one I heard on the radio. There's a little town in Queensland where they have a festival to roll pumpkins. Pumpkin rolling festival, because they thought... they said they got together, what have we got? The only thing they had that was distinctive was a steep hill. They thought, what can we do with this steep hill? I know, we can roll pumpkins down it. It's the Goolwa pumpkin rolling competition. Now...
You think that's sort of demeaning?
Yes, I do. I find there's a sort of pathos about this. I mean, you know, it's
fine.
They
could have a pathos competition, right? Australia-wide.
If people want to roll... yeah, I do. I mean, I suppose I do have a sense... You're right, there is a sense of sympathy I have for these people that, to me, many of them look like they've been marooned by history. You know, they were put there by particular historical processes with the settlement of the land. The land was, you know, not able to support the sort of fantasy of the European closer settlement and market towns and that sort of range of inhabitation sites, and many of them are effectively marooned. And so that's not really about a solution, but it's just to sort of try and explain why that happened. They're not there from lifestyle choices. They are sort of marooned by larger historical forces.
No, I think that's true. And I guess but the question that your essay raises is, what then do we do to save them? Do we roll some money out there in a pumpkin to them, or do we say, well, I mean, you're going to have to do something else?
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of them are doing other things, you know, because there's the continual movement of younger people from the country. And also, I mean, the farming is now extremely efficient in Australia. It doesn't employ very many people. So farming isn't the answer to what we do with all of that land we've got. I suppose that's one of the conclusions I would have come to. Farming was what the 19th and 20th century nation thought was the answer to closer settlement. We can fill up the land with people. That's what we can do with it. With farming families, well, that hasn't worked. So we've got to think of some other way of putting some people out there. Seems to me. Otherwise, do we just have, you know, these enormous farms with a few people on them, and the rest of us all living on the coast?
Well, there's a huge disparity between, I think, even in the Murray-Darling, but beyond that, between farmers who are doing very well, give or take, you know, the fluctuations of markets and weather, which is always the case with farming, and farmers who are just, you know... the farmer of the year told me up in Wilde that probably 40% of the farmers, he had to be forced because they're tribal, but 40% probably shouldn't be on the land. Now, the consequences then for the communities are going to be probably considerable. And the only way you're going to develop, you know, a place like Dubbo, you can't park in it. It's worse than Burke Street. It's absolutely like a boom town, as Bendigo seems to be. And they don't seem to need the hinterland to thrive anymore, because services have been put out there, businesses have been put out there. But obviously that's not going to save the little places. No,
that's right. No, I mean, they won't be saved. I mean, this is not about, you know, they won't be. I mean, and they will only last, you know, 1.5 generations or 2 generations. That's sort of fairly inevitable. But that doesn't mean, you know, but these bigger towns are thriving, and perhaps they're getting to the point where they can actually start to be more like, you know, well, I mean, they are in a sense self-sustaining at some degree without the farming hinterland.
Somebody said to me in Mildura, you know, when the MurrayDarling Basin, those series of insane meetings were going on, you know, what does Mildura need? Another 100 million tonnes of rotten Chardonnay irrigated, or 100 university places, or 100 tech school places? And the answer was, to him, self-evident. Try and tell that to Barnaby Joyce when he's got a crowd going.
But I mean, I think that's a problem. I think we can't leave the fate of so many people and so much land to the National Party.
That's a very good point. Yeah. But it's very hard to wrest it back from them if you go to one of those meetings, I can tell you.
I mean, like there's recently been this Grattan report, which said regional universities don't add anything to regional towns. And it seemed to me to be a particularly narrowly focused sort of report. It said you can't find that the towns with universities are growing faster than the towns without them or something. But it didn't seem to say, well, isn't this actually quite a good thing to have these regional university towns? There's a whole lot of things they can offer in terms of space, and they're slightly cheaper for people to live in, and a whole range of things. And that would be, I think, a good thing. Like the dream of decentralisation has been followed by, governments have tried it at various times. They tried it in the 50s. People say, oh, it never really works. Well, nothing ever really works. I mean, things work a bit. And, it's worked a bit. I mean, Wodonga was a result of the Whitlam government's attempts at decentralisation, and it's actually a more populated, thriving place than it would have been if Whitlam hadn't have happened.
That's the phrasing. Better than it would have been. I think that's a lot of places are like that. We don't know. We know they would have been worse. We don't know. However, I'm serious about this. I think you can say that about Dubbo and Warrnambool and those places. They are better than they would have been if we hadn't done something.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. And that's what politics is. Politics is not about getting the best solutions. It's just getting something that's a bit better than it might have been otherwise.
Yeah, but then you can also have, can't you? Surely you can have. There are sort of hidden catastrophes that go on too, like the Murray-Darling and the way it's been handled by compromise, more and more compromise, until the place is almost unsalvageable. Or you have catastrophes like, and this I think is a point about building a kind of, raising the base of knowledge among rural communities. There is a sort of, they're very suspicious of science.
Some of them are.
No. Well, let me give you an example, an historic example. If you take those irrigation schemes, they went out there with fallacies.
Yes, I know.
And even as recently as 20 years ago, they were told that what they had to do was rip out all their old vines and all their stuff that was good and stick in Chardonnay and grow it with masses of water. And these three large companies, it wasn't government deceiving them, but they all went over to it. And they went from $100 a tonne to $15 a tonne, and they're buggered.
But, I mean, there's other sectors of the economy, like retail, for example, where these things happen. But, I mean, one of the things that happened with the Murray-Darling is that government over-allocated the irrigation water. I mean, it's not just the fault of the people who were there.
No, but that's right.
But they're going to fight for it. And probably a lot of them will end up having to leave. I mean, so, and now there is a. I mean, if you compare with, say, 30 years ago, there's now a real national focus on the Murray-Darling Basin, and people are much better informed about it than they were. So that's actually seems to be an improvement. Now, there's still, we've got a federal government that's fairly weak, or very weak, so it's in a very difficult...
Very weak.
Very weak. It's in a very difficult position because it doesn't actually have the confidence or the political capacity to actually do anything very much in the face of any sort of opposition. And that we haven't quite seen what the outcome of the Murray-Darling thing is going to be yet.
I guess my point would be that as this is an historical essay, it might be worth asking whether the signs are that the history is going to proceed rather more fruitfully in future, or we may go much the same way. Will we go on making the same mistakes?
Well, you probably, being a pessimist, will think that, and me, being an optimist, will probably think it'll proceed.
I'm not a pessimist. I'm a disappointed optimist, but I'm not a pessimist. That's not a pessimist at all. In fact, I was desperate. It cost me a lot of political kudos to support regional initiatives, as we called them in the 1990s. I mean, if you remember, Bill Kelty and Lindsay Fox went out there and did all this, and the economic rationalists destroyed them.
Yeah.
And Bill lost all sorts of credit, but he was right. Kelty was right. The regional initiatives were good, and Labor would have won. I believe would have won in 1996 if they'd done it properly. But that's another story. But I think there's a lot to be said for it. I'm optimistic about it. You may as well be optimistic because there's nothing you can do if you're pessimistic. But when you run into They're terribly tribal, don't you think?
Who's they?
Groups of farmers.
Yeah, but...
Try and insert a new idea into a group of farmers. You'll run around all day trying to poke. You won't get it in there anywhere.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is not true.
They're the only people who dress in their own...
I mean, land care was a new initiative.
Thought up in Canberra.
It might have been thought up in Canberra, but it was taken up by a lot of people in farming communities. It was a new idea.
Yep.
They took it up. They mightn't have had it themselves, but they did take it up.
Yeah, if it's a new idea with money behind it, they'll take it. It's true, Judy.
I'm sort of a bit defeated by your sort of... I mean, because, you know, the farmers are not the only people out there, you know?
OK, I'm for you. I'm for the towns as well.
You know, and the tribalism, well, you know, there's a lot of that, but there's now a lot more... I mean, still not a lot, but there's some of the new immigrants are going into country towns. Not a lot, but some. There's, you know, there's university, there's more regional university towns than there were. So, you know, things are changing. And I actually think things started to shift around 2000. I think the 80s and 90s, when the economic rationalists were running things, was really bad, when, you know, they wouldn't put it, you know, the country was meant to just benefit from a sort of trickle down by the main game being got right.
You think that's true?
Yeah, there wasn't much attention, I didn't feel. And I think that, I mean, when did we start... you may remember this. When did the country become the regions?
Probably around the 90s, early 90s.
In the 90s, you know, there was a point at which the term country effectively disappeared from the vocabulary, and it just was there for country music, or it became a term that Indigenous Australians used to talk about their country. But the country that you know, when we were growing up, that meaning of it to describe the sort of settled pastoral areas is basically gone.
Wasn't it taken over by the word bush?
Well...
At the meeting I went to in Mildura, Ian Sinclair stood up and said, "I'm a bushie like the rest of you." And I thought, well, you're a bushie of one kind, but you're not like a... But I've never
thought of like the sort of dairy farming areas up around the Goulburn Valley, which is where my father grew up. I've never thought of that as the bush. There's not hardly that much vegetation at all.
I know.
You know, like I've thought of the bush as being like, well, you know, places where there's a lot of trees.
But it's changed now. I mean, everyone, you know, from the squattocracy down, call themselves bushies, or the...
Well, I don't think my...
Telegraph, you know.
Yeah, but the Country Hour, I thought that the Country Hour disappeared, but the Country Hour is on the Victorian stations, it's on the regional stations, there's still a Country Hour. Mm. So, I mean, the bush was referred to certain sorts of things. So I don't know, other people might have a memory, because it did seem to me that the bush was a bit of a...
Oh, the meaning's changed, there's no question. You know, bush was a sort of down-market sort of country living. Bushies or bushmen were, you know, a dying race, really. And the country was more dignified.
Or sort of settled, in a way.
But the bush has come back to mean everything now. Towns, farms, everything.
But people also talk about the regions, and that seems to mean everything outside of the settled, I mean, the capital cities and the really big towns.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it's been around in Labor policy, at least, for a very long while, that some people in the Labor Party believe that a regional system is better than a federal, the present state system.
Yeah, that's right.
That it made more sense to, you know, there was more common interest in a region than there could be in a state.
I mean, one of the... there's this person, AJ Brown, who's at Queensland. There's a group of people up there, and I guess Queensland has an interest in... a greater interest because it's bigger territory, saying that the National Party, they think, should take up the interests of regionalism, and if they want to turn themselves from being a sort of basically a farmer party that tried to then be a sort of morally conservative party, that essentially failed, and take up the sort of argument for much greater regional autonomy in the way in which government operates. I mean, it's an interesting argument, but you can't see much that the National Party are that interested in it.
No, I guess...
I think there is a sort of a political... I mean, in a way, the success of the independents shows that there's quite strong senses of regional political identity, particularly in parts of New South Wales and Queensland. Mm.
Yeah. I think we might have some questions from floor.
Or some people might even have solutions to these problems.
Yeah, well, we've got to look for solutions. That's what all optimists do.
There was a question. You have to tell them what they have to do.
Yeah, raise your hand and speak into the microphone when it reaches you.
Me? There might be another process operating in country towns which might lead to a solution. And that is that the composition of the people in the country towns is changing.
Yeah.
There had previously been the sort of people that had been there forever, and then they were joined by the well-off people from the cities that retired there, and then the young families sort of started to come again. And the relative proportion of those three have different ambitions as to what they'd like to see happen in their country towns. So I wonder if you could comment on whether you see a change in the way the country sees itself emerging out of these changes in population.
Yeah, well, it seems to me that, you know, that there's a whole lot of different parts of the country, of the regions, if you like, of the countries, but that's exactly the sort of thing I think, and that's why I think Don's focus all the time on farmers is actually missing a whole lot of changes that are happening and which give a lot of new possibilities to a lot of these towns which we thought of as country towns, as if they were basically towns there to service an agricultural hinterland, but they're actually now developing a quite different sort of demography and economy.
If I might add also, there's another group of people who move to country towns, and that's actually poor people who can't afford housing anywhere else, and they become almost a sort of subclass in country towns, particularly within maybe 100 miles of the main cities. No question. They're quite complicated places now, and refugees quite often. Yeah, but I don't know. I
mean, the point is really just to say, you know, yes, that there's a whole lot of changes that are there, which the focus on agriculture misses.
I wonder if you could comment on two elements. The dichotomy between country and city seems to me a bit strange, given that, for example, most of the fruit and vegetables eaten in cities in Australia are grown on peri-urban areas on the fringes of the city. They're not grown in the country. Most of the capsicums and asparagus and everything like that we eat in urban centres are grown on the fringes of the cities, not in the country. So could you tease out a bit that dichotomy? And you've not mentioned agribusiness once, and it seems to me pretty fundamental when we're talking about the transformation of rural and regional Australia, where whole swathes of industry have been taken over by agribusiness who are not rooted in the regions, and the capture of the Country Party, National Party, by agribusiness has led to the rise of people like Catter and Windsor and so on, who are rooted to region and who are not transnational corporate interests who run most of Australian rural production.
The terms country and city, the way I was using them was that they've got a very... They're as much about sort of cultural identities, if you like, and a set of cultural arguments as they are about geographic places. And it was to try to show the way in the argument between the country and the city. Yes, when we've been tending to talk here about the economic trade-off, but there was also a set of cultural associations that were that clustered around both country and city, and that had a very long history with the idea that people in the country had of themselves that they were somehow more real, living lives closer to nature, more morally worthwhile. Whereas and it was there in the imagery that Tony Windsor used when he talked about the eastern suburbs of Sydney as a huge feedlot. And these have got... So I was really trying to talk about cultural places rather than do sort of proper, use them as geographic terms, but as cultural locations. And you're quite right about agribusiness. I mean, I didn't particularly talk about it because I wasn't... but I could have to talk about the way in which that transforms regional areas, but it was partly that I was wanting to get a bit away from agriculture has been there as an underpinning of country life, but it seems to me now a lot of the regional economy is not based in agriculture at all, and in some ways that seems to me gives it more sense of a future.
But isn't it also true that that's where it becomes of great interest to people in the city?
Because
what's
of the
grown there.
Well,
we eat, as you say, we grow 93% of the food. I mean, on two really basic scores. One is we eat the food, so how are they growing it? That's a very interesting question when you go and talk to them. And agribusiness is associated with this, chemical farming, all this sort of stuff. And the second question is, that's the environment, which is what we do share with the country. It is the nation is for a continent stuff. So, and I think agribusiness has a lot to do with whether farms live or die too, whether towns live or die. Very much the case. Anyway, next question.
I just wondered if you, instead of talking about farming, which is very important and so on, if you could just elaborate on the idea that you briefly mentioned about a responsibility to occupy the land, or what our relationship to this entire continent is. And I read the essay and I wondered whether in the back of your mind you couldn't actually get rid of the populate or perish sort of idea that we all grew up with, certainly, and what you mean by owning the land or being responsible for, what our relationship to this huge continent would be, and how presumably we ought to be developing some new way of thinking about that, or just mightn't be a new way, but at least where do we stand now that in relationship to that. And then I was sort of thinking, well, does this mean that there has to, that, as Bob Catter says, there have to be 60 million people in his electorate because he thinks, they can all live there? Or is it actually enough, in a sense, in terms of occupying or owning or having the land, that Indigenous people are occupying it? Do we have to actually have sort of universities in far northern Queensland or in the Gulf? Or I just wonder how I meant by relate to all of that.
I wasn't using the idea that, like when the populate or perish idea, which really was, we have to sort of somehow look as if we're here because otherwise other people will come here. It wasn't that so much. It was actually from a conversation I had with Jim Morgan, who I can see in the audience, who lived for a while on more remote areas on big properties. It was the sense of we actually need people in the place in some way, to sort of care for it in some way. If there's towns in an area, there'll be, people will look after the local wetlands in some way. That if people get lost, there'll be communication system there. It was more sort of fundamental, and I agree. In a lot of the areas, there's Indigenous people living there, and that's fine. That they can care for the land. It's just that it was really just to try to say we can't. There's a quote that I've got that's from an article that was written about decentralisation in the 1950s, where the person says, we can't be just a series of sort of cities perched on the periphery of a depopulated bread bowl, and much of it wouldn't even be a bread bowl. It would just, and so it's really just that of saying, well, we've got to in some way think about the fact that there's all this land there, and do we, and Don is quite right, a lot of it is now sort of rubbish land. It's been much, it's been, it's full of feral animals and blackberries, and do we just sort of say, well, there it is, it's now full of feral animals, and leave it to, and turn it into a sort of badlands, as I said, I think of Mad Max and Bradley Murdoch and feral goats. So that it was really just to ask that question. It wasn't really to say, and the Bob Catter thing is sort of seems to me a bit mad. 60 million people.
You mean the thing? Why don't you just say Bob Catter?
That 60 million people could be there, sort of. But So that's really all. It was just, it's not the populate or perish, or, you know, I mean, and maybe, you know, maybe the Indonesians would do a better job with the North. Like
filling up abattoirs there and that sort of thing.
Well, they might be better at making use of irregular rainfall. I don't know. Like, but I mean, but it is that sense that there is all this land there, and we can't just let it be or let it go or something.
In fact, we export our skills in dealing with rainfall and dry land farming to Indonesia. We actually go and train them. We're very good at farming. We have been for a really long time. But what's astonishing is that we're so good at farming compared to the rest of the world, but we have made such a hell of a mess of such huge parts of the environment. And I reckon that's where it gets very interesting about what the city thinks about the country, because we do have the numbers. We may have nothing else, but we've got the numbers.
That's right. And we always have had.
And that's why I say that the tribalism of the farmers is very bad for them and very bad for the nation as a whole. That really, to resolve any of these problems in any partial way even, requires them giving up that tribalism and people in the cities taking an interest in the environment as a whole and where their food's coming from and all the rest. And that's the debate you can't have in the present political arrangement, because it is a tribal fight. And for the most part, I think city people just think, oh, well, you know, that's them. And we'll take their national stereotype. We like that. They're amusing and the rest of it. But the actual intellectual engagement, the MurrayDarling Basin debate is a perfect example. I mean, they just bounce off each other. There's nothing. You have a madman like Barnaby Joyce trying to rev him up to revolution or something that he doesn't know what he's doing. And I mean, that was the most astounding thing, because here was a guide. It said in the first 3 paragraphs over and over again, this is a guide to the thinking of the MurrayDarling Basin authorities. And it was treated as if it wasn't a guide. It was treated as if it was a blueprint. This is what was going to happen to them. And no one anywhere stopped them and said, hang on, we're just here to... The one person at the meeting I went to was Sinclair, who was very grumpy about the whole thing. And I thought, well, he's all right. But everyone else was just completely in the dark. And that, I reckon, is where that's the next essay, is actually, you know, how do you make that engagement work?
Yeah, but to do that, people need to, in a sense, know where people are coming from. I guess that's
Quite.
You know, and the tribalism is partly underpinned by a notion of country life as morally superior, closer to nature, and you're right, and a suspicion of the city and all of that. I mean, that's all quite right, and we need to. And city people have their own stereotypes. You know, they may be amusing, but they also see it as full of these sort of, you know, rednecks. And I mean, and Kata plays up. I mean, and also the country keeps producing these people. So
the 2 great mass murders of the 20th century were provincial. So I mean, you know, you've got to watch out for provincials. You know, Stalin, Hitler, provincials. Pauline Hanson, Bob Catter. No, I mean, I think. Oscar Wilde said anyone can be good in the country, which in my experience, Oscar was rarely wrong about anything, but he was really wrong about that.
Anybody can be good, you mean like a good person? Or?
He said, anyone can be good in the country.
No, yeah, anyway. There's plenty of rural Gothic out there.
I spend about half my time in South Gippsland these days, so I'm very interested in Don's comments on it. I spend a good deal of that time fighting blackberries, actually, and I've planted some thousands of trees. Now, there are a lot of people in that area of South Gippsland who are fighting blackberries and planting trees, and in fact the area is visibly becoming, gaining a lot more managed bushland sections in among the farmland. I think the land care program that Judy talked about is actually taken very seriously there.
I do too.
And the people in that part of the country are actually pretty committed and enthusiastic, a lot of them, about transforming that environment. So I don't know that I agree with your sense of disappointed optimism.
I'm speaking cosmically. I'm not talking about land care. I'm speaking about...
Yeah, but you're generalising about those people out there about tribalism. Now, it's a very mixed community indeed.
I did say that as well.
It's actually artistically very active, which is...
Which part of South Gippsland are we talking about?
Round Foster.
Yeah.
And these are people, you were talking before, both of you, about people being marooned out there. Now, my sense very much is that the people around Foster think that those in the city are marooned. I mean, they don't like coming to the city. When they talk about town, they're talking about Lee and Gather, and they don't even often like going to Lee and Gather.
No.
I mean, there's a very positive valuing of aspects of it, and I don't see it as tribally sort of Neanderthal and resisting change or anything of that.
You don't have to be Neanderthal to be tribal, might I say.
Well, there are
that's a bit of a sleight of hand.
But I think what's interesting, though, there, Gay, I think, is that there's a lot of the people who are doing that. It's in a sense city-based money that's going in, and people, either retiring or having second homes or whatever, or moving there, and then being able to plant trees and everything. And in a way, that's more like what the English countryside was, because there was always a lot of people living in the provincial towns who had money from elsewhere, retired naval pensions or from rents or whatever. That is, they weren't all living off the agriculture of the land. And it seems to me that that's a good thing if a lot more of the city money is in some ways going out into the country, and where people do want to sort of be engaged with really active regeneration of bushland and stuff. I mean,
I suppose like you,
but the thing is, you didn't grow up there. I mean, and I think that's Don's problem. I mean, not a problem.
I didn't grow up in Foster. That was like New York. I mean, being that much further away. I mean, they're very tight. The communities were tighter then, but I know, But I mean, I think there's obviously limitless work to be done in regenerating
so if
land, but I don't. But it requires massive. The communities doing it are good, but to do it on the scale that is ultimately required, all sorts of decisions have to be made, and massive amounts of capital have to be invested. You try and fix the Western New South Wales, with community planting projects, it's not going to work.
Yeah. I mean, there isn't. I mean, and I think that one of the things that, in a sense, one comes up against in this conversation is the issue of scale. I mean, it's just the massive amount of land that Australia has. That it's sort of it's the geography of the place is sort of it's a bit defeating in some ways. I think
I'm just wondering about your definition of country, because it seems to me you either go with Don and farmers and passion fruit sponges and tribalism, but if you go with Judy and the people down the front and communities with lots of different people coming in and out of them, well, what's a country apart from just more open space and some fresh air and blackberries?
And this person comes from down near Foster too, I'm pretty sure.
Thank you.
Well, that's a good point, and it may be that with these the sort of thing that the guy who asked the first question when he was talking about the very changed demography of a lot of these regional towns, it may be that those people actually won't identify with that old notion of country. That they may think of themselves as living in some sort of town rather than in the country, and that may shift if they don't have the connection with agriculture anymore. And then it is about them just living somewhere else rather than in the capital cities. But that in itself seems to me to be quite a good thing if we could have more really vibrant regional towns, of a decent size in Australia.
It's funny that I often, when you see these really vibrant regional towns, I often wonder what these smaller regional towns think about these, because there's always so much resentment between, like Curramborough, Lee and Gather Foster, Yarram. There's a sort of, some towns just do better than other towns. It's always been the case, and no one quite knows why, but And I think the whole point of regionalising this was to try and get over the sort of pettiness of shire squabbles and the myopia of shire views by making them bigger, giving them a sense of scale and what have you. And maybe it's a generation, in a generation or two, people will accept the fact that one faggy has got something in common with a town 18 miles away.
Yes.
How do you account for the fact that, generally speaking, the country is a lot more conservative than the city? And do you think that maybe the introduction of national broadband would maybe open them up to new ideas if you think that the idea is isolation?
Well, I don't think that they're more conservative than the people in the city because they don't have access to information. I mean, they've got radio and television and books. But I think that if we were talking about farmers, which is what Don was talking about, I mean, there is a sense in which, when you say more conservative, I mean, it's hard to know what more conservative means, but if people are able to live in communities where there are more people who are like them, I think that makes people more conservative than if they've got to live inside of they've got to live in social spaces where there's a lot more people who are different from them and they have to negotiate that more on a daily basis. But I think there's also, though, in politics, politics is really slow. There's always a sort of belatedness, it seems to me, about political organisations and political forms and political ideologies. It's as if they represent the social experiences of the generation before. And in a way, I think all of our politics is pretty conservative at the moment. I don't actually think that the National Party politics is... I mean, it's hard to know because the Labor government's so...
very weak.
So weak. But, I mean, there's a sense in which you feel that it's all zombie politics now, that they're all somehow disconnected with the ways in which the society's changing. But when you go back, and you look at the 50s and you look at what the political parties are doing, and you've got Corwell and Evatt arguing about various things, and you've got Menzies and you've got Jack McEwen, and yet the society is being completely transformed by a whole lot of things, by post-war immigration, by the development of manufacturing, by the spread of communications, and that's all sort of happening beneath the radar at the time. And I have the sense that there's something similar happening now, that the society is actually changing in ways quite fast that we can't really see, and that the politics is on about the experiences of 2 or 3 decades ago.
But it's curious, though, isn't it, in that, this is what I mean by the tribal thing, that when Tony Windsor becomes an independent, you suddenly get some ideas out of Tony Windsor, and he's suddenly in a position of political power when the opportunity arises, which the Country Party was never going to give people. And their initial reaction was shocking, rat, he's run away from the tribe. But in fact, he's thinking about it better than anyone in the Country Party's thought about it for a very long while. And he's actually the most interesting politician on the stage at the moment. I actually do listen to him. And that's what I mean, in their own interest. Farmers, towns, the works, all their interests are related. They do better when they break out of this sort of sense of we're all the same here, because they're not. That's what I mean about the farmer who said, well, really 40% of them can't make a go of it, and it'd be better off for everybody if they weren't here. To have that idea, you've got to get outside, the culture of the place.
Yeah. But I suppose, in answer to the question, which was about the conservatism, it seems to me that if you look at the Labor Party at the moment, none of them are able to get outside of have other ideas either. I suppose my response was that I see this as a problem that's across the political spectrum at the moment, a general sort of conservatism of everybody locked into positions, rather than it just being a problem for the country.
Yeah.
Over here, sorry.
Yep.
Do you think there's just a sense of romanticism that we have if we're looking for solutions to this problem? I mean, even if we offered tax breaks to companies to move to regional centres, they will in turn create denser regional, denser cities and towns. Density is a vacuum that actually, attracts more and more density. And also the point that hasn't been raised is that, areas of less density have larger carbon footprints than denser areas such as the big cities? And is that going to be, is that something we should be encouraging, that sort of thing in the future?
Yes, I mean, like but the thing about the less density is at the moment our capital cities, we've just got this huge sort of suburban surrounds, which is one of the things that's adding to our carbon footprint. I mean, one possibility would be for us to have, like Europe, where you've got really good trains linking regional towns, and so that it doesn't mean that the people in the regional towns have to be spread out across the landscape. But, the Romanticism, I mean, in a way, it seems to me that these are really, really difficult questions that Australia faces, because Australia's got an incredibly difficult geography. And, it's not just the size of the land, it's also the fact that most of it is uninhabitable and it's incredibly arid, and it's got a really unreliable rainfall pattern. And to some extent, after 200 years of habitation, it's like we're only just really internalising the some of the sort of limits that the land and the environment and the rainfall patterns and the soil. I mean, we haven't talked about the fact that the soil is actually not that arable by comparative standards. That it's as if we're only just coming to terms with that.
Yeah, I mean, or
internalising it, or thinking that it's not something that we can wish away.
We might never internalise. I mean, if you take the reaction to the abattoirs in Indonesia, for instance, the kind of suddenly the cities look up and think, God, this shocking thing is happening. I mean, if you were trying to start an Australian pastoral industry now, you wouldn't get to first base. You just wouldn't have one. If that's the community attitude to cruelty, you just wouldn't have a pastoral industry, because read the history of the pastoral industry. Millions of animals die every year in the most appalling ways, from starvation, from thirst, from scab and disease of every kind. You wouldn't have one. You'd say, no, we're not going there.
Well, that's what a lot of vegetarians think.
But they think that about killing a few animals in an abattoir, as opposed to how the
but people who don't eat meat, that's what they think. I mean, that's what they would think, that generally that would be better off to not have a pastoral industry. So
yeah, well, but what about sheep, wool? Is that all right? I mean, what I'm saying is that we'd still have been a pastoral industry if we didn't eat them.
Okay.
I actually grew up between Foster and Headley, so
it's unbelievable.
How many people here from South Gippsland?
So I was born there. A family of farmers who are actually very receptive to new ideas, to the point that we all vote Green, which is not the majority view, I acknowledge. But I'm intrigued when you say that there's a feeling that the politics is always sort of a generation behind. It does feel like we think of the country as conservative because in some ways the National Party has kind of gerrymandered itself into the illusion of relevance. But really it feels like they're kind of coasting towards the end. Only 10 seats left now or whatever. So given the challenges that are coming of climate change and peak oil, which we haven't talked about, do you think that these things are going to reorder the politics of the country in a new and interesting way? I mean, how do you see those issues?
Well, I mean, I think they will, but it's I'm much better as a historian. I'm much better at explaining the past. But it does seem to me. I mean, you're quite right about the National Party, and the Labor Party is looking much like that too. I mean, it's very hard to know, but there's a sense in which the national politics at the moment is sort of farcical in its disconnection from the ways in which people are living and thinking. And the thing is, the Greens are obviously there, and they've captured a new sensibility that's there, and in a way it's hard to know where that's going to go, I think.
The interesting thing about the Greens is obviously they're not a huge force in the country, but there's not a massive difference between the urban and rural vote. It's just that because of the way politics works, they don't get elected out there, but there's not a vast gulf, it's only a few percentage points.
Yeah, no, I think that is interesting, and it's showing, if you like, a sensibility that's emerging that actually is not fractured by this country-city divide in the way that the politics of our past has been, and I think that's an interesting point that you've raised there.
I think we have time for one more question. I think I saw some indication, or maybe you haven't even got that. We'll have one more anyway.
As a permaculturalist, I guess I find it really interesting the issue of the semi-aridity and the vicissitudinous weather conditions, which you've alluded to quite correctly, that characterise the Australian continent. Given this hurdle, maybe the problem can actually be transformed into part of the solution if we were to apply more permacultural perspectives on our monoculturalised, overly monoculturalised agri-industries and attract some venture capitalists from other countries that also have difficult farming conditions. For instance, the continent of Africa has some similarities to our own continent in that respect. Parts of the Middle East have done some really interesting research and development into micro-irrigation very successfully. So all I'd say is, why not try and attract some diasporic cultures that have some experience and aptitude in farming in difficult conditions.
Good idea.
Put that to Bob Catter.
I was going to put it to you for your next essay, actually.
No, I'm not a permaculture expert.
Right. Okay, well, thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Judy. And I think you can buy this out there.